Today we're going to talk about international and global nonprofit organizations. So we're going to try to set the stage for the international context for nonprofit organizations. First and foremost, the rapid growth of communication technology, and that is the internet and the internet applications and internet communications, has tremendously changed the international context. Changes in global politics, culture, and economics, as well as communication. The spread of democracy and capitalism following the Cold War, the establishment of free trade areas and organizations, and the movement toward outsourcing government services to the private sector. The greatest threats facing humanity are not confined within any kind of national borders or in single continents. These are worldwide issues. The nonprofit sector in the United States remains the largest, and the philanthropy on a large-scale basis is primarily an American phenomenon. But similar organizations are increasing in number and importance in many nations and on a global basis. We're going to talk now about international nonprofit terminology. Terminology is important in this chapter. The nonprofit terminology that we widely use in the United States is not used internationally. They don't use the terms that we've been using throughout this course, like nonprofit organization or nonprofit sector. They do refer to the civil society sector, however, which is a term that refers to organizations that operate between the government and the private sector. Non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, are terms that you'll hear on a regular basis as they relate to nonprofit organizations that operate between government and the private sector. NGOs are organizations that are not operated by government. They are under the direction of a U.S. nonprofit. The precise meaning of NGOs really varies greatly around the world depending on the countries that you're talking about. The largest number of NGOs provide services. Then they're often limited to organizations with a social missions. And the contributions of these organizations are predominantly focused on poverty and human health issues. Their most comparable concept to nonprofit organizations on the international level are NGOs. Donations to organizations not registered in the U.S. are not tax deductible. Now that's important for you to remember, that donations to NGOs that are not registered in the U.S. are not tax deductible in the U.S. Non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, have their origins in the United Nations system. And depending on where you are in different parts of the world, they'll have different legal frameworks, they'll have different funding sources, and they'll have different relationships with their governments. Now, the best known of the NGOs are the International Governmental Organizations, or INGOs. You'll want to know the difference between an NGO and an INGO. The best known are the international non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam. Sometimes they're said to be transnational because they operate across national borders. According to the World Bank, there are two primary types of INGOs. The first being advocacy INGOs, which promote a cause or an issue on a multinational basis, and operational INGOs, who design and implement economic development projects. Tracking the existence and the work of NGOs and INGOs. There's no single source of comprehensive data. There's no organization or agency that's tasked with this assignment is to gather information. There's challenges, obviously, to gathering information in various countries around the world because there's really no one way to do this type of work. But there are various attempts to track the existence, the work, and the effectiveness of NGOs and INGOs going on now, and you can read about those efforts in your textbook. International philanthropy and fundraising. International philanthropy predominantly consists of grants and gifts from American and Western European donors, as mentioned. Substantial gifts usually focus on global poverty and health issues. Also, microcredit and microfinance institutions that offer small loans in developing countries to people who would otherwise not qualify for credit are another effort. Internationally, private organizations have been called upon to replace services previously provided through government programs, leading the growth of worldwide fundraising as an important profession. So that means that internationally, the private organizations are replacing more and more services that were provided through government programs, which in and of itself leads to the growth of worldwide fundraising as an important profession. So if this is an area that you're interested in, this is a growing industry. Obstacles to international fundraising. There are common obstacles to international fundraising, the first and foremost being the cultural differences regarding organized fundraising. And keep in mind, organized fundraising has typically been an American model, so the cultural differences are a challenge. There's also a lack of surplus income or wealth in many of the nations, so if there's not extra income or wealth locally that's available to contribute it, then they would have that obstacle. There's a lack of international brand recognition for smaller NGOs, so they just aren't well known. There's also the missing tax incentives for charitable giving that I had mentioned earlier. And there's an inadequate infrastructure or technology. So the advent of the internet is worldwide, but has not reached every part of the world and is not readily available to everyone all the time on an international scale. International nonprofit governance and management. There's a great need for orientation and training to develop common understandings and expectation in terms of governance and management internationally. I had mentioned earlier the issues of culture being an obstacle to fundraising, but the culture is of central importance to governance and management. The culture often drives economic, legal, and political characteristics. The culture is less visible than legal and political characteristics, and the culture differences frequently manifest interpersonal relationships. And all of this means that you have to take the culture that you're dealing with into consideration. It's of central importance to being successful in nonprofit governance and management. International nonprofit governance and management. We're going to continue to talk about this now. And the issues and the challenges with national structures are just as exacerbated on the international level. So the problems and the challenges that you have on a national structure are just even more challenging on an international level. And those challenges would include relationships between the national offices and the chapters, the trade-offs between centralized and decentralized management. The trend is actually toward more decentralization, which would mean pushing decision-making down and autonomy down toward decentralization and to the local level. As NGOs evolve from local to national to international in scope, they need to develop their governance structures to accommodate board members from various parts of the world. There's a discussion in your text about the evolution from local to national to international in scope. There's a continuum there that's discussed. So as they evolve, their governance structures need to accommodate board members from various parts of the world. And the larger the organization, the greater the need for flexibility. That's an important point. The larger the organization, the greater the need for flexibility. Effective leadership requires skills in communication, flexibility, and tolerance for ambiguity. So those are challenges also for governance and management. Now there are common models for international government. And when I say there's international models for international governance, these are what have been adopted in various places and in different countries. So some provide a seat for a representative from each region to serve by the organization. Some provide a specific number of members or percentage of the board to be international without saying exactly where they come from. Others have open elections with a nominating committee that's mindful of the need for geographic diversity without any specifications.